interesting, the timing of this, because while people are always retiring, it seems to me like a lot of people are retiring at the same time, because last week I was in Vienna and I saw Adolf Kruschnitz, who's just retiring from UDK in Munich. Martin Steinman, of course, a year ago retired from Lausanne. Tony Breton, I think, is about to finish in Delft. Yeah, and a lot of very big figures in education, and in a way there aren't that many, I would say, are kind of leaving, not necessarily through their own choice, but through this issue of getting to a certain age. So the door is open for sort of significant time, not just for your school, but a few schools, I think. Yeah, exactly. It's, I must say, my initial reaction immediately is how impressed I am with the seriousness in which you, as one of the jury, one of the kind of review people, are taking on this, because I think that's admirable and necessary, but rare, I'm the chair of urbanism and housing, and I share that chair with a friend and colleague from Zurich, an architect, Bruno Kruker, who's from the von Balmus Kruker office in Zurich, who are fantastic housing architects. And we decided to teach together. But there's a long story about this teaching business, about the relationships, but so I share the chair, and Jonathan is running his own professorship separately in Mendrisio. And we set out always to teach together, so up till the opportunity that arose for Jonathan in Mendrisio, we were always teaching together from the very first days of practice. So from 1996, we started working at the AA, just down the road, and then we moved to ETH as visiting professors for 2 years, and that was then followed by, a year later, a similar visiting professorship in Lausanne. And then we decided to take a break, but this opportunity occurred quite quickly in Mendrisio. So Jonathan has taught at all 3 schools in Switzerland, and I must say it was quite a significant moment of break, because as we're going to discuss later, what is the role of teaching in practice? Up to that point it was a very connected process of thinking and teaching and practicing. We agreed what the programs were. The whole thing was about 2 of us thinking about, and in a way developing as teachers together. And at that moment of change, I think we were both a bit anxious about how that would be. But after 2 years now, we both absolutely see the huge benefit of at that moment beginning to develop our own teaching practice. We know each other so well. We've built up our ideas about teaching together. So it was then. This actually provides us with a bit more freedom to sort of explore areas of thought that in the end we're both interested in, but we're able to sort of double up almost, study and think about different things. But of course the most important aspect of that teaching is this sort of shared discussion. This relates to this word research, which is a difficult word, but the discussion that comes out of, say, preparing for a teaching agenda, or reacting to a problem that one sets oneself, or a theme that one sets oneself as a teacher. Once you split it and we go off our separate ways, what's been very important is to find the time to share in what we're doing. And that can be through inviting each other to critique at our own schools, which we do, and it means finding time together to show each other what we're doing, or to discuss what we're doing. And that's working well enough to feel that it's really a satisfactory step to teach separately, But I'm going to be talking all over the place here, but research I wanted to talk about, because what does research mean? I know we've used the words research in our own texts and thinking. Maybe that's partly being influenced by other people's use of the word research at the time we started to use that word. When I reflect upon it now, I I mean, in my mind, what does that mean? I think in practice, we feel that we are always looking for opportunities to look into possibilities of ideas about construction, for example, which we would term research. So we might explore, as we did for many years, timber panel construction, something like that. And we'll use the project almost as a vehicle. Either it's a competition or a real project, and often two things, because over a series of projects we develop a greater knowledge and an understanding of the capability, the capacity of such an idea. When it comes to research and teaching, I find it, and this is why I find teaching so compelling and so necessary, that as a busy office, as a busy practitioner, you very quickly realise you have so little time to learn, to learn about the history of architecture, to step outside the busy day-to-day and observe, ask oneself a question, be forced to articulate a set of answers. If we didn't teach, we would just be busy. And the teaching provides this structure for learning. And so to me, when I think back at that word research, it's not really, it's a bit like learning. It's about, we pass on, of course, a huge amount of energy to our students. And hopefully with that comes a lot of motivation from their point of view. But for us, it's a very necessary opportunity to learn and to develop our own learning ourselves. So Bruno and I, for example, in our introduction to our students, which in fact we're about to give next week, always talk about the idea of a studio environment in our teaching, because we like to think that we're part of that group. We're perhaps directing some of the questioning and providing avenues to find answers, you could say, but in the end we're just part of that study group. And this is one reason we like the idea of teaching together, because when I say we teach together, we really teach together. In other words, we go together every 2 weeks for 2 days, and then that's how it works. We never go on our own. We don't teach students on our own. So the teaching situation is immediately not a sort of one-to-one, but a discussion. The fact is, there's a kind, and I think it's unusual in Germany, but we avoid this, oh that's right and that's wrong, or the professor says this. While we often agree with each other, of course, most of the time we do, but the discussion we're having is an exploration of thoughts and a reaction to work. And I think in Germany the tradition is much more traditional, of sort of the big professor saying, well, you should do it like that, and that's wrong, and that's right. And we hear students say, is that right? Is that wrong? Which we find shocking, really. We understand why they say that, but when I hear that, I realise that what we're doing is the right thing. We're opening this discussion, and as I say, to us it's about learning. And I always look forward to the new semester. What is the theme that we're going to explore? What, in the end, research do we need to do to build up intelligence about that theme? And so in Munich, what we did was we set ourselves a 3-year plan based around the study of a number of themes, and then we would build a project around those themes. Well, they were pretty general in a way. One was about spatial planning. In other words, it was an encouragement to confront conventions in terms of how the planning of space was made. So through big study models with no drawing in the whole semester, we worked only in 3 dimensions. We developed a project that was also, in a way, unusual, because it was a communal house. So it was communal living for young families living together, or over 50-year-olds living together. An idea that is actually, I think, really growing in terms of its popularity as a reaction to too many single family households. A decision to begin to pool your resources and live communally. So it was a sort of interesting program, and it hopefully forced the students to have to think outside their usual conventions of what should be drawn and how. And then by not drawing, but by only making models, they were connecting spaces and forming spaces in a way that they would not usually do, because they are incredibly sort of conventionalized as students, as most students are, but my experience in Germany was no different to anywhere else, that they were really stuck. You know, they had their arms tied behind their back already.
And why is that?
I have various theories about this, but I think two things that come to mind immediately. The huge influence of the modern movement that's sort of in the blood of architecture, and of course I was taught in the same way. You know, Jonathan and I then have spent the last sort of 15 years unlearning, you know, what we learnt as truth, and I see it in the students, you know, form and function and all this stuff. And the second thing is technology. I now see students, and their computers are sort of part of their body now. They just, you know. And to the very skilled ones, that's fine, because they recognise it is a tool. But to many of them, they're stuck in this machine. So they don't understand scale, and they don't understand material. They don't understand the idea of difference. You know, so we talk a lot about this sameness, you know, how if you're making an elevation and you draw it by hand, you know, every window you draw is just by the act of drawing is going to be different and requires effort. But now, of course, they make a window and they copy paste 16 times, and they have a sort of supposedly perfect repeated building, and then and of course it's dead, you know, as a project. And so, yeah, I think those two reasons have very much inspired our own teaching to remove drawing as much as possible for a lot of the time. Instead, what we do is, by working with models, we tend to, at the end of the semester, say, now survey your models. Now we make the drawings are a survey. And they put the drawings up on the wall, which, by the way, are completely controlled, exactly how they should draw. That's the other thing, we have to teach them to draw. But we tend to say, this is how you're going to draw this drawing. We have model drawings, and our assistants prescribe it. Yeah.
So which
line weights, what's Photoshop, what's tone, these kinds of things. And you just look at their faces and you think, yeah, because they can't believe what they've drawn. Because of course they've designed it in 3 dimensions. They would never draw it. Most of the projects they make can only be made by thinking 3-dimensionally, you know. So I think they see something through that process. So that's one thing we do. And I think the model making, which you can see in our office, it's such a fundamental part of designing, in our opinion. You know, other offices I know don't model at all, or somehow have this amazing imagination that they can conjure up every single 3-dimensional junction, which they're better than we are. We have to build it and see it, but actually, of course, I know that we do it because we see opportunities in that process. So we like to encourage the students to realise that models are not about are a tool, you know, just like a computer is. And this is the kind of model I like, you know, it's stuck together and it can be untaped and cut up and used again and tested again. You know, I don't, you know, sometimes we'll make something more careful because we'll then get to a point where we need to present it for some reason or another, or in a competition it needs to describe a sort of an idea about tectonics or something. But as the paper foam board models in this studio and in our teaching studios are really the kind of focus of work. Yeah, that's 1 to 20, but in the project I just described, which was a very long time ago, I started to tell you about the 3 themes, but within that first theme, we asked them to work at 1 to 10. We asked them to make a space of this project at 1 to 10 in the first 2 weeks. And it was also, again, a bit of a provocation, because we also set out to avoid this tendency to teach design in a kind of linear way. You know, start with a site and 1 to 500, 1 to 2. And in Germany, it's unbelievable that they really do see that they start here and they end up here. First of all, we say we don't want to finish the project. We're not expecting a complete project because we're going to ask you to do 7 pieces of work. Every 2 weeks, you're going to present each piece, and it's a piece of work in itself. And if it's all going well, then we tie things up a little bit at the end. But we don't expect, and we're not interested in seeing a project because, to be honest, in 15 weeks, most students aren't going to develop a project to such maturity that it's going to be worth that much as a finished project. However, in 15, 16 weeks, they can really explore some ideas that they could then show in a really material, physical way. And that's much more interesting for all of us, and usually for the student as well. So the first theme was about thinking about space planning. What we would do is in this 3 years is that all the 3 themes I'm going to mention are always there, but we kind of give an emphasis to each of the themes per year, and that's 2 projects. So for the first 2 semesters we concentrated on that. The second theme was type, so patterns, and we still thought about the plan, you know, and the third theme I'm going to mention in a minute, but the concentration of the project was through type. And in fact, we, for example, we set the first project in London, and we looked at the terraced house, and the students built 10 terraced houses of friends of mine, because I have many friends who live in terraced houses, and I chose 10 houses of different scales. Like the smallest is a little Georgian cottage terrace, and the biggest was the AA, Bedford Square. And they built 1 to 50 MDF models. But most importantly, they could get into the buildings because they were all people I knew. So they were invited. So they came to a city, many of them hadn't really been here before, and they were inside a terraced house in London. And that was a real eye-opener for them because they saw life going on. You know, so they understood about vertical living and things. But again, in a continental climate, it's quite unusual. I mean, I know you're used to it, like we are, but Central Europe is less used to the idea of living upright. And then the third type, which we're really embarking on now in our 3rd year, is construction. So we're setting our project in Milan, and we're really going to concentrate on facades. And the title of our new project is The Culture of the Facade. So it's looking at how we make facades. And we'll start by looking at the very interesting pre-war, post-war architects in Milan. They'll be studying the facades very carefully, as Nagavenda, Gioponti, etc. And then they will be making a project in a given place in Milan. And what we also do is we tend to choose neighbourhoods. So while there's a theme, there's always a place, and the place is always a big place, big enough for everyone in the studio to work in. So when I say a big place, I mean a neighbourhood, an identifiable place. So if it's in Munich, it's a particular area. In Milan, we've chosen a particular place that has certain energy about it. And then we select sites within that area. So again, what it means is that almost always the focus of the work is a model of that place. And they all are working, sometimes next to each other, you know, sometimes 2 groups on each site, depending on how things go. So they have a sort of group mentality as well as an individual set of issues. They have a theme, but they have a real place, which has a real character. They have to describe, they have to understand it. So, yeah, and then, so that's construction. Again, we'll be having to think about the space planning. We'll have to be thinking about what does type mean when it comes to a big urban building, a metropolitan building. But the focus of the work they produce will be related to the making of the wall. You know.
And then also in a material sense. So
yeah, so for example, we're going to be using plaster or an alternative, and we'll be making big scale bits of the building.
sort of
You mentioned in your notes about the everyday and things, and how does that influence us? But I must say, Jonathan and I are finding increasing interest in looking at older and older buildings. I think we're finally learning our classical, the classical learning, having not been offered it really at school, and not being mature enough perhaps to understand it. In later, as one matures, one begins to understand that we are working within a kind of a culture of architecture, a sense of continuity, and we place ourselves in that. The Smithsons taught us that, and I think we're now finding that ourselves. That we're from the early years where, for example, we were working with ideas of construction that related to multi-layered facades, sort of breathing walls, rain screen systems we're using on almost all our projects. There was a moment when we made a competition in Denmark, a museum in Bornholm. You might know it as this. We never built it, but it wasn't. We didn't win, but it was a brick vaulted construction. But from that moment, we really started to explore weight, and with that came a better understanding of tectonics, and the learning came through Semper and these things. And so this is sort of where we are, but I'm sure teaching contributed greatly to that understanding. We understood a long time ago that to be an architect, you could decide what that meant, and it meant to us an opportunity to build, but an opportunity to think, and we were drawn to writing as well, and teaching was kind of connected with that, and that's what we do. We didn't set out to sort of build as many buildings as possible, but instead to build good buildings and to learn through the process, and teaching offered that, in a way, that discipline. So it's inevitable, a crossover, I think. Well, I suppose inevitably one finds something new and then gets excited about it, and perhaps through age as well, it's not just a sort of drop in. One sees something, then one builds up into an understanding around it, then before you know it, you're actually learning about a period but I would say there is a period that I'm very interested in personally, and it has been stirring away for the last couple of years, and certainly has influenced our thinking and our work together. And that is this strange period of less than 100 years of the Elizabethan period, so the mid-16th century to the end of the 16th century, that there was a moment where English architecture, something really interesting happened, because it was still on the one hand rather provincial and a bit quirky, and on the other hand Serlio and even Palladio were beginning to be discovered and finding their way into buildings. And so Hardwick Hall, which you may have heard of, by Robert Smythson, and other buildings by not only him but one or two known people. Most people don't really know who built what in those days, but there was a certain form making that I find really interesting, because it's not overtly classical, and I find it very English. It's sort of slightly odd, difficult to define, local, but in terms of planning, it was highly ritualized in terms of its use and internally, and so I find that a really interesting. Last year we took our students from Munich on a English country house tour, which was a great success. We were really looking at the house and the way the plan worked, and about how facades were made, this fascination with symmetry, and how the inside and the outside very rarely work together. So for me it's great to prompt the students to realise that you can be dishonest, form and function is rubbish, that you can be much more subjective and intuitive in the way you think and work, and acknowledge that a sort of emotional reaction is just as important as anything else. It's amazing that people, they seem it takes a lot of energy as a teacher to break open this fixed idea of work that the students have already. They have almost no reference, but they work as they think they know exactly how to be an architect. It's amazing.
And did that also take you a lot of effort to sort of get this freedom at the university where you teach? Or because I can imagine that if they're used to this sort of
well, that's. I guess I have to be very careful what I say here. What I would say is that I think we were brought into the school in Munich by the great efforts of a few people who recognised that there was an opportunity to adjust the way of thinking. And we arrived as foreigners, a Swiss man, an English man, in a big German university. First of all, they didn't like the idea of two professors because they didn't have the right forms and the infrastructure didn't work for two people, So that took a long time just for them to agree. They tried to split us off. But I mean, we're interested in teaching students. Of course, as professors, you have to enter into the politics and the infrastructure of a school. As a visiting professor, it's lovely that you don't have to do that, but we have to do that to some extent. And ultimately our feeling is that we should teach, and we're encouraged by certain people to do what we feel we should do, and that's what we do. And if they really don't like it, they'll tell us eventually and we'll leave, But at the moment they haven't said that, and the students seem very, we're beginning to build up a strong identity in the chair and a sort of loyalty from students. So is it going to be just the quality of work of the students that says it, or is it in the end that we conflict too much with other people's fixed ideas? I don't know. I don't really care too much either, because we could do something different. We don't have to be there,
And it is about the students and what you get out of it, of course.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Not so much about the hierarchy above.
Absolutely. And I think this relates to this issue about practitioners, because I'm pleased you mentioned this, because I know Bruno and Jonathan and I feel very strongly about this fact that this issue, that it makes a big difference when a practicing architect starts to teach. First of all, we see Jonathan and I see ourselves as European practitioners. We're not particularly English or whatever, and we observe that the best European architects usually teach. Those two go hand in hand, and I think it makes a huge difference because it creates a sort of discipline. You don't just hang out and talk nonsense for so long, or lose a sense of reality by being purely an academic or a full-time lecturer or something. There's a level of urgency, and I think the students get a vibe from you that you're building, And in our discussions, we're constantly talking about what we're working on, or we'll be discussing a detail as a reaction to the students' work on a facade or something, and we'll be debating a jam detail or something, and it's just so obvious that it's to do with what we're dealing with on a daily basis. So I think the students just enjoy that because they feel that they're right at the coalface of ideas and building, and construction. I can only see that as a positive. Of course, it depends on the collaboration, but my experience is really positive. I wouldn't take, say, the professorship in Munich on my own. I felt that it was impossible. Jonathan and I both felt that we couldn't both take, 2 days a week teaching and run a practice. So I wouldn't have done that. But actually, in my experience, a whole new collaboration has opened up. In some way, my relationship with Bruno is like I have a new office. Because we have a staff, we have an identity, we have to set the agenda. It's a relationship which isn't that dissimilar to my relationship with Jonathan. So it's a fantastic opportunity as well. So it's not just about making things work, but it's also an opportunity. So this idea of a joint professorship is also fantastic for those people. But yeah, and we bring different things. You know, I remember sitting listening to Bruno giving his first lecture to the students, and just realising that he was calling upon references I didn't know, and the same thing was happening with him, for me, and it was fantastic. You know, suddenly the chair had double those references. You know, of course, there are many shared, but then there are these others. So we had a bigger capacity. I think we're bringing more to the students for that reason. So I think that's a very positive possibility. You know, one of the things I would ask as a question, I mean, you talk with Peter Märkli, you know, he supposedly shares his chair with Marcus Petter at ETH. Well, they do share it, but they do something very different to what we do. They run a semester each. So they're effectively running, and to me that would be an interesting question to understand where the collaboration exists between them, other than a friendly one. Because it's exactly
build on top of each other.
Because that's the kind of model that Munich, for example, their idea of accepting our joint professorship was that we would do one semester each, and we said no, we're not going to do that. And I believe there's a big difference. So I would say that's a very important part of your assessment in Eindhoven if you were thinking of potentially splitting it, how it's split. Question. One thing I would say, if I was being critical or if I was observing the difficulties of the practitioner-teacher, it would be that we spend our life running from airports or from train stations into school and running out again, giving 150% energy but never feeling satisfied. And I think that's shared by everyone I know who does what we do. And the thing that is really, what is sacrificed is a kind of political engagement with the school. And in Munich I have the problem of language, because I don't speak fluent German. And so anyway I couldn't really kind of engage. However, it's more fundamental than that. I don't think we could in the time that we have. And one possible idea about collaboration is, I've seen this happen before, where you don't involve two design teachers, but there's a sort of a way of splitting up some of the infrastructure or admin with teaching of design or something. Again, it requires two very carefully selected people to make, because they need a connection. But
then one is more the practitioner as an architect, and the other one is more the maybe politician.
Because the reason I say that is that when we're sitting at the marking session of the diploma work or something that we do every semester, I just realise that there's such a role in trying to think strategically over the whole school in a creative way, and it's very often done by managers or people who are not maybe the best person to do that, and that is perhaps creates even bigger influence on a school, you know. So I feel, in my weaker moments, that Bruno and I in a way are completely ineffectual at Munich, because only when we start to influence the selection of professors or influence the teaching agenda for the whole of the department or institute are we going to make a difference. You know, in the meantime, we're just inspiring a bunch of students, and making individuals sort of find themselves, you could say. But of course that's important, but from a school's point of view, I just wonder, you know. And I don't think we could ever do any more than we are. The kind of change that will occur through what we're doing is going to take some time. It would be a generation of students, you know, who demand some kind of change, or some kind of direction. So I think that's another problem with the practitioner, or a problem with the practitioner as a teacher. I saw Adolf Krishnitz last week in Vienna, and he's just retiring after 20 years. And I said, "Oh, will you be pleased that you don't have to teach anymore?" And he said, "Well, I don't know what I'm going to do, because teaching is so important," as we all agreed that it was. And he's got to find something to fill that gap. Because he said, I kind of get things done when I'm teaching. Like, if I don't have that, how will I be an architect? And it's just, to me, it was interesting. So the idea of teaching, sometimes I feel like it would be nice to have a year off. With visiting professorships, after 2 years, it was great just to have a year of break and then develop ideas and energy to get back into it. And now it's not like that. Here comes the third year, and you have to get on with it. And anyway, until we're exhausted, until we feel we've done enough in Munich, or a really amazing opportunity comes up somewhere. But an opportunity did come up for me recently, which I turned down because I did feel it was not yet concluded in Munich. So that's the sort of fudgy answer for you.